We haven't. We probably want to go ahead and make sure that people are in. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Well, actually, maybe just like a minute or two. So hang out with us for a second and we will roll right into the webinar. Welcome, everyone. While we're hanging out, we're going to get started here in about 60 seconds. I just want to throw out there, I would love to know what part of the world you're in. What are you joining us from? Because we have hundreds of people on this webinar who apparently are curious about a singular question, which is, how do we figure out the DevOps skills that we need in order to implement things DevOpsy in production? So what part of the world are you from? Paste it in the chat if you don't mind. Sorry, correction, question and answer if you don't mind, please. See a couple people from India. Thank you for switching over to Q&A. Excellent. See Austria. Cool. Oops. Moving my slides forward. Malaysia, India, good. Europe, Lithuania, South Africa, India, the UK, Netherlands, Colombia, some more Malaysia, obviously some more India, Morocco, Japan, Rio de Janeiro, and Brazil. Awesome. India, Washington. Excellent. Okay. Well, we're going to get started. And please continue to type in where you're from if you're just now joining us, because we are about 2 minutes after the hour, and so we want to get rolling. So if you're here today, you're here to answer this really the singular question of, has an engineer or has a team or has multiple teams, how do we answer the question of what skills do we need in order to implement an app, a service, or a technology properly? I'm Michael Forrester, and so that's what we're going to talk about for about the next 45 minutes, and then we're going to leave some space for Q&A. And the idea is that when you leave here today, when you're done with this webinar, you have a very clear framework of how you can navigate discovering what skills you need for a particular technology or technologies associated with the technology, which I'm going to throw that concept out to you early, and we're going to talk about it. So, first things first, let's talk a little bit about the problem a little bit more, right? So the challenge here, and by the way, if you see me looking to the right, I'm looking at the screen. If I'm looking to the left, I'm probably looking at your chats. So I do reserve the right to respond to questions in Q&A as I see them. So the problem, as you probably know, is that in 2025, we are having a tremendous problem sourcing people both in skills for ourselves and for the people that work for us. And so whether you're a leader or engineer, figuring out what skills you need can sometimes be overwhelming. And if we look at the state of DevOps in 2025, I mean, the trend has just kind of continued, right? And basically the challenge is this, is that the expansion of technology has pretty much overwhelmed our ability to acquire skills. And if you doubt this, by the way, let me just throw this out there. I'm going to say one word, and you tell me if there isn't a whole new set of things that you need to understand. ML ops, right? What does that even mean? ML ops. Or let me pick something even less controversial. Platform engineering. If you're in the DevOps world, right? Platform engineering is in a sense like the new DevOps. And so like what skills do you need to do platform engineering well? What skills do you need to be able to do, for example, Kubernetes well or cloud? So whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, or you're a leader running teams, this framework that we're going to talk about will help alleviate or at least start to solve some of these problems that we run into around what skills do we need? Why does it take so long for me to get something in production? What training do I need to develop skills for? Like, how do I do that? And of course, without the proper skills, you're going to see project delays, you're going to see burnout and bottlenecks, and you're going to see innovation stall. That's a big challenge, right? So with that in mind, just to say this is that, it's projected that just the DevOps market alone is going to grow to 25.5 billion in 2028. So, I mean, we're not talking about something that is, light in terms of, financial reward, but I mean, we are seeing huge gaps, a lack of skills, and of course, DevOps remains an in-demand job, even with AI helping us all to apparently do things better, faster, quicker, and at higher levels than we've ever seen before. I know that's a little bit of the hype train, but there is substance there as well, right? So AI though isn't going to solve all our problems. Someone's going to have to figure out how to operationalize the AI and run it. So even if we're just, lionizing that as a possible solution, AI is more of a force multiplier. There's still going to need to be people who are going to run this thing, right? So upskilling is really kind of the new approach that we're looking at. And so let me just check out here something because I think people are saying they're seeing a black screen. Oh, good. Just making sure that's not the case. So upskilling is pretty much the approach that everyone's taking, right? Is that, unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware that there have been more layoffs, again, at least in the United States, maybe primarily federal. I'm not going to get into any of that. But people are staying at their jobs longer. We're investing more in the people that we have, which is actually an awesome place to be in. But acquiring skills and upskilling, that's pretty much the thing that people have been focusing on for the last few years because we've got good people, but the skills and the technology keep expanding. So how do we keep them and how do we upskill them? That's what this framework is actually for. Now, just so you know, my name is Michael Forrester, and I have been doing this for a long time. I've been in the industry since 1996, and so I've watched the rise and fall and evolution of technologies across the board. And whether it's, the launch of cloud in 2006, Docker and Kubernetes in 2013 and 2014, now platform engineering, now AI, LLM ops, ML ops, all of that stuff. And so I've been doing this for a minute. And by the way, you can catch me at michael@kodekloud.com or at LinkedIn. And the idea here is that I work for basically an ed tech platform. And what we do is we focus almost exclusively on DevOps. So this framework is to help you figure out what skills you need to acquire for either one technology or an ecosystem of technologies. And by the way, this could be an app, it could be a service, it could be a technology. I'm not limiting it. So that's what we're going to be focusing on is a system that you can use to figure out what skills you need either as an individual, a team, or a company to implement a technology appropriately. That's pretty much it. So let's talk about this 4-pillar DevOps skill gap framework that we have, because I think most of you, when you see this, will say, oh, Michael, yeah, that makes total sense. Like if you've been in the industry for a year, the things that we're about to talk about, most of them you're going to be like, oh yeah, monitoring. Oh yeah, logging. Of course, Michael. Of course. Like those are the kind of skills you need because anytime we launch something in production, there's about 24 things that ideally we have solved before we get to production, right? Because nobody wants to be figuring out how to log something when we're failing in production, correct? Or is it just me? Maybe I spent too long in production. So let's talk about these 4 aspects of, basically skill acquisition that you need in order to implement a technology properly so that it matches a DevOps mindset. Let's talk about it. Okay, so 1, and there's going to be a lot of words here, but don't worry, you're going to get a copy of the presentation, and we have a way for you to consume this that is very simple, both an ebook and an assessment. So I know you're going to see a lot of words. Just take a breath, take it in. It's going to be fun, right? So let's talk about this. And this is interesting because, you won't see people talk about this from a DevOps perspective. You see people talk about this from an architecture perspective, right? When we talk about business justification, it seems like we're talking about business analysts and architecture. But I just want to mention that DevOps has always included some measure of business justification because ultimately the business and the business's customers are our customer, right? In DevOps, that's true. So when we talk about, and I'm going to pick on Kubernetes here because I'm going to deep dive into Kubernetes later. But like if someone comes to you and says, I need Kubernetes, and you have a rock solid system, let's say, I don't know, you're already using like Docker Swarm, or you're on a cloud provider and you're already using like, EKS and Fargate and whatever, or maybe you're happy on ECS, so you're not even using Kubernetes, you're just using a proprietary container system, and you're super happy and you're rock solid. If you can't justify why you want to go to Kubernetes, and I know Kubernetes is the light and the way, and I'm not knocking Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a fabulous piece of software, right? But I just want to say that like part of strategy is these six verbs of justifying the technology, who's going to design it. And I want to be clear, designing isn't just the architect's jobs. All of you as engineers and even as leaders are making design decisions every single day. Now, they might be at the systems level, they might be at the software level, but you're making design decisions. So a high level design and some tactical architecture is absolutely valid. Not only that, who's going to cost it? How much is this going to cost us? If you spend $1 million and you get $10 million of value, poof, the value is there. We love it, right? But if you spend $1 million and you get like $100,000 worth of value, then that's not going to be worth it, is it? And then not only that, productization. Now, you might say, Michael, why would we ever talk about productization? I mean, isn't platform engineering and internal developer platforms, isn't that just productization? Because if you build, for example, the most amazing Kubernetes ecosystem in the world and nobody uses it, well, was that DevOps service successful? So I know that this seems like the least technological skills that you would have to develop, and arguably they are the most important because if you don't figure out how to train your people, if you don't know what team is going to do it from an implementation standpoint, if you're not costing and you don't figure out how it's relevant for the business, quite frankly, that technology is probably going to fail. But that's just me. So these are the first six of what I like to call the 24 verbs of production. So this is service strategy. So if this was Kubernetes, by the way, you'd figure out how to cost Kubernetes, how to productize it. And I'm going to deep dive into Kubernetes later so you know exactly how this can help you, not just with a single technology, but with an ecosystem of technology from a skills perspective. Okay? So, and just a reminder is that, if you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, you can join the webinar directly from the link, especially if you want to do a little Q&A. So if you want a little bit more interaction, just know you can always join us directly on Zoom. All right, so let's talk about the second of the pillars. This is provisioning. This is also sometimes called delivery. This is also sometimes called initiation, right? The idea is how do you set up a service? How do you take a technology, and I'm going to again pick on Kubernetes. How do you take Kubernetes and how do you launch it? I'm not even talking about supporting it. I'm not even talking about operating it. How do you launch it? These verbs here, by the way, for those of you, again, who are in this space, they're going to look and you're going to say, oh, yeah, of course, Michael. Storage. How are we going to do storage on Kubernetes? How are we going to do networking on Kubernetes? How are we going to build it? Who's going to do that? What about configuration? And by the way, if you think provisioning and configuration is the same, they can be. They're close. But some of our tools, for example, that launch like images are not the same as the ones that ongoingly configure something. Like your Ansibles, your Chefs, and your Puppets, as an example, right, can be great configuration tools. You can also extend them into provisioning, but that's a little different than Terraform, which is really built for provisioning, and we kind of extend it into configuration. Don't get me wrong. I know there's some close overlap, but I just want to draw distinctions there. Because once you provision something once or twice and you've got something immutable and automatic and that automatically works, you may have to evolve that over time unless you're doing purely immutable infrastructure. But I digress. The other verbs here for initiating a service, provisioning a service, include securing a service. How do we discover the service? How do we deploy on or to the service? Right? So like for Kubernetes, for example, we got to launch applications. How are we going to do that? right? Most of the services we launch offer a service to something else. For example, if this was a network backbone, then how are we going to provision other things to connect into our network backbone, right? If this was a storage service or storage technology, how are other things going to consume our service? How are we going to deploy clients onto our platform? And then distribution is if you need to replicate the service. So for example, if this was a Kubernetes cluster, you might want to put multiple Kubernetes clusters in different parts of the world. And so how are you going to handle replication, federation, policy, governance, all those pieces? So how are you going to distribute that? Like how are you going to distribute? Like you might look at something like I would say KubeFed, but I think that project is kind of dead. But like Rancher, for example, you might have multiple ways of federating and managing via Rancher, multiple clusters the world over. So things to think about. That's just the second pillar. And notice there's 8 verbs here. Number 3, operations. This is where you get into governance, auditing, documenting. And by the way, when I say documentation, we don't need heavy-handed documentation necessarily. You could have great infrastructure as code comments. Your code base alone could be your documentation. And then we've got things like licensing, maintaining. And I just want to say this, by the way, maintenance, which includes patching, updating, and like system maintenance, is an evolution of configuration and security in the previous section. So typically, if you've solved the configuration and evolution problem there, then your security is going to be pretty good and your maintenance is going to be okay as well, right? But there are considerations in maintenance that you won't find in configuration, like updating software, as an example, like the core software. And notice performance is there, perform. And that is deceptively small, but it could conclude things like scaling, right? Capacity planning, SLAs, SLOs, SLIs, right? I don't want to munch all those things together. But scaling alone, by the way, could be a huge piece of this. How are you going to keep Kubernetes performant? As an example. Other things to think about. Support, the 4th pillar. So just to be clear, we've covered strategy. We've covered provisioning. We've talked about operations as a skills framework. What about support? So for example, who's going to support this? What are the workflows? Is there an on-call rotation? What are the escalation procedures? How are clients going to get to you? If you launch Kubernetes as a service, how do they get access to you? And then what about recovery? Now, this is where reliability really lives, right? So reliability, for example, that could include DR. It could include fault tolerance. It could include HA. Part of those, by the way, also exist in design, which you saw in the strategy, and also in, for example, configuration, right? You might have that as well, or even distribution if you have DR considerations as well. And then the last 3 pretty much make up observability, although it's not metrics, it's monitoring. So you got monitoring, you got logs, and you got tracing. So let me ask you, here we are, and I've talked about how this can give you an understanding of the questions that you need to be able to answer for even just a single technology in production. Does that make sense? Is there something missing? Right? And I want to point out that this actually was something I came up with almost 10 years ago. And it is derived from ITIL and ITSM, if you've ever seen ITIL and ITSM service management, right? That this is just something I've derived over like the better part of a decade as ways of which skills that you need. Because if we look at this from the beginning, all of this needs to happen for, like, say, Kubernetes, right? But we also need to provision Kubernetes. We got to figure out how storage persists on Kubernetes, both for the worker nodes and the control plane, right? How do we network? Networking in Kubernetes can be super complicated. So when your team, for example, is thinking about, oh, let's adopt Kubernetes, just Kubernetes itself. Let's forget about Kustomize and Helm and all of the other associated technologies for a moment that go with Kubernetes. You have to have the skills to do at least a little bit of storage with Kubernetes, a little bit of networking with Kubernetes. You got to understand how to configure Kubernetes. These represent the skills that you're going to need to successfully launch that technology. And therefore, this can help you figure out the gaps that you as an individual or your team has when it comes to putting this technology appropriately into production. So that's the use of this. Now, within each of these 24 verbs, And for the astute of you, there's actually 25, but I just like to refer to it as 24. There's actually 25 verbs. But for the astute of you, I just want to say this is that within each of these, there's a level of competency. So your brains may be completely blown at this point in time because you're like, Michael, you just showed us 25, 24 verbs that could be skills that we could acquire. You just went through things like provisioning and configuration and monitoring and logging and tracing. And you're like, and now you're saying that within each of those 25 verbs, there's levels of competency. Yes. So for example, let's say that your team only does support for Kubernetes and they don't have any documentation. They pretty much do everything manually using kubectl, right? Or whatever. I'm not going to pick on your tools, right? And they don't really have anything documented. And even amongst them, there's no consensus about how they troubleshoot problems. That's level one. Level two is that same team that only does support. They might like, hey, you know what? We actually generally know how to troubleshoot problems because we share information and we talk to each other. We don't really have any documented processes, but culturally, we know what to do. Still manual, right? But not really documented. And so the tribe knows what to do, but someone walking in is going to have to pick up that knowledge. It's not written down somewhere. Level three, process driven. So here, and again, let's pick on something very specific. Let's say logging, right? And so they've got documented logging, but it's not implemented consistently with like all of the apps or even Kubernetes itself. It's a relatively manual process because you got to go in there and turn the logging on. There's some scripting, but not necessarily deep levels of automation, but it's process driven. Like we've got a process. That's level three. And then level four, right, is all about, I have a documented, probably version controlled. It could be infrastructure as code, and it's got a lot of automation, and it's based on pretty much industry standards. So like if this is Kubernetes and you were like, I'm just using EFK, the minute you even say the words EFK, I probably know what you're talking about. You've probably got Elasticsearch, has your storage. You've got Kibana, has your dashboard. This is the E and the K. When you say F, you're probably either using FluentBit or FluentD because I already know what that is. And if you've got documentation on it, and that's level four. And by the way, most of us are trying to get to level four, just to be upfront about it. We're trying to get to level four. Now, level five is a little bit of nirvana. And I actually, unfortunately, got spoiled in 2014 because I worked in an environment, Chris Kelly, where level five, like the team had basically set up level five, right? Self-healing, fully automated, mainly GitOps workflows. When I say self-healing, it wasn't 100% self-healing, but for known problems, it would automatically restart or troubleshoot and would automatically respond. And in level five, engineers modify, for example, the infrastructure as code. They don't log into systems. They don't log into boxes unless it's just an extreme need. So they don't mess with the technology itself. And so I want to note, like, these five levels exist in each of the verbs that you just saw. So whether it's provisioning or configuration or security, you can go from manual operations all the way up to a fully automated self-healing kind of system. And I will say that level five seems more possible nowadays, has AI agents kind of mature more and more and more, but we got a little ways to go, so we're not going to get too excited about that. But level four is more than possible. So this is the five-level DevOps competency model inside of basically the 25 verbs that you just saw. And that's what we're shooting for. And so in its entirety, these are all the verbs, right? These are the verbs, the skills that you're going to need for every single piece of technology. And you might say, Michael, every single piece of technology? Well, I don't know. You tell me. Let's switch off of Kubernetes for a second and talk about Terraform, right? Terraform is typically a binary, right? So what are we talking about here? Well, what if you already have a great methodology that uses Ansible? Do you need to add Terraform into the case? Now, don't get me wrong. Ansible can be extended into provisioning. Maybe it's not built out of the box, but if you know it really well and it works and it's, costing wise, you've already figured it out and you've got a good workflow for it, and all that works, do you need to switch over to Terraform? But if we do, let's say we do move to Terraform, does Terraform have storage? Oh, you bet it does, right? That state file, that state file, or if you're using, the enterprise version where the state file is stored out, that state file, by the way, is a headache sometimes to manage. So don't tell me for a second that there's no storage in Terraform. What about securing Terraform? Do we have security concerns? Of course we do. And so sometimes the verbs aren't as heavy when applied to something like Terraform, right? But they're still applicable, right? So keep that in mind is that, uh, no matter how small it is, whether it's, commands on a Linux terminal or even like, for example, like shell scripting, right? You do have to figure out how to like log with shell scripting and, you might even have some monitoring in place. You do have to figure those things out. So it's still applicable, right? So one of the questions, by the way, that just popped up is someone asked in this previous slide, how much will AI incorporate with DevOps and Kubernetes, right? That was some question someone was just asking. And I would say that, as far as like 2025, I think the jury is still out, but I can answer this with a surety. One, AI has definitely been a force multiplier for most of us in our development processes. And I will say this also is that if you haven't checked out projects like CacheGPT or seen AI ops invade products like Dynatrace, for example, you're going to see a lot more of that, where you're going to see LLM style sophistication injected into almost every facet of DevOps. So the question for you, for us, by the way, just from a very narrow and specific skills question, is that how much will AI incorporate with DevOps Kubernetes? The answer is heavily. It's going to be heavy. And I'm not joking. And by the way, 20 years ago, no one had cloud. Well, first of all, DevOps didn't exist 20 years ago, at least not in name. But cloud wasn't a thing that system administrators needed to do 20 years ago, right? 10 years ago, right, in 2015, we were starting to just add containerization and Kubernetes to our skill sets, and now it's kind of expected, right? Platform engineering wasn't even a thing as far as like verbs go and like names, right? Technologies until like 2018. But 2025, you probably at least need to know what platform engineering is, right? So AI is the same thing. It's just like yet another skill that has been thrown into the mix. The only thing saving grace I see with AI is that it's probably going to save us from having like to know everything. We can now truly be T-shaped people who know a lot about something very specific. Like we're really good at like Ansible and Terraform, or we're really good at like Python programming, but we may not know as much of the rest of the T because, the knowledge is kind of available to us. But like I said, jury's out. But to answer your question, heavily, Jimmy, heavily. There is no stopping it. It's much like people getting labeled DevOps engineers. We just can't stop it. Okay. So before I move forward past this, because I'm going to dive into an example of applying this not just to Kubernetes, but how do you discover the ecosystem of skills that you need for Kubernetes? I have one question for you because this is curiosity that pops into my brain. Is it if you can type into Q&A, or I don't know if chat's open, but I think Q&A still is. How many of you are engineers and how many of you are like, let me rephrase that. How many of you are individual contributors? Because I know some of the leaders are engineers. How many of you are individual contributors and how many of you are leaders of teams, right? Just kind of curious as the ratio of like people who are trying to figure out how to use these skills personally versus how many people are trying to figure out how to get their team or their company these skills. Oh, good. Looks like a lot of individual contributors. Excellent. Yeah. Good. Good, good, good. Yeah. Um, and I saw someone's earlier comment about uh, you know, AI isn't necessary yet, right? And I would say that's not true. I agree in the sense that it's not absolutely necessary to do your job because I know that it sounds weird, but some of us are actually still solving infrastructure problems. I know that sounds strange. Like we're still trying to deploy, virtual machines, containers, and serverless. We're still trying to manage cloud. We're not out there running AI everywhere, right? But I feel like it would be irresponsible if I didn't say this, right? You've got You've got to know AI fundamentals. You absolutely have to. Please start now. It would be a complete disservice as a DevOps engineer and leader for me to tell you not to start dipping your toe in that water if you haven't already done it. Please do it. Please do it as soon as possible, right? So still learn cloud, still learn Kubernetes, still learn platform engineering, use these verbs, but please dip your toe into AI. Don't let it go, right? Um, so I just want you just to be prepared. Okay, so given the time, right, we got about 15 minutes left. I want to deep dive these verbs into something specific like an ecosystem, right? Okay, so let's talk about this. So let's say that you're like, hold on, Michael, hold on. You're like, hold on. I want to figure out how to not only do the verbs for Kubernetes, but are there associated technologies that I can figure out with this same framework? So I know that's a little mind blowing, right? But we're going to, like, you can use this framework to not only figure out what you need from a skills perspective for Kubernetes, you can figure out what other technologies you need using this same framework. How do you do that? All right, well, let's talk about it. So, first, look at this for a second. So, this is strategy. So, this is a repeat of the slide you saw before, but instead of listing what justification and design and implementation looks like, this starts to talk about the possible skills, processes, frameworks, and technologies you might need to know if you're going to put Kubernetes into production. Notice Backstage is listed there, by the way, right? By the way, if you haven't checked out getport.io, I think it's an amazing service for creating platform engineering. If you haven't touched it, it's amazing. I think it's just called Port, but I think their website is getport.io. Not to be confused with another port that also does container stuff. But like, look at verb number 6, enrolling, right? CKA, CCAD, training platforms, webinars, lunch and learns, hackathons. Because remember, enrolling is about winning hearts and minds. And if your people are not familiar with the technology, why would you throw it at them and expect them to be able to implement it? That's a little weird. So we want to be careful with that, right? But notice TOGAF is listed here, which I have a love-hate relationship with TOGAF. And notice that this is the lightest of the technologies necessarily that are associated with Kubernetes. But wait, let's go to the second tier. So let's switch off of strategy and let's go over to provisioning. Now all of a sudden you see all the industry favorites, right? You see the Terraform, right? You see the Istio, you see Linkerd, you see Vault by HashiCorp, you see Caverno, right? You see all the tools and technology. And by the way, the 24, 25 verbs of production need to be applied to these things. So how are you going to like use Ansible? How are you going to launch it? How are you going to monitor it, log it, trace it if it breaks? Don't get me wrong, the footprint is way smaller than Kubernetes. But my point being is that this framework can also help you figure out what tools and technologies you also need to acquire skills for. For example, if we're deploying onto Kubernetes, everyone knows we're probably talking about Helm and probably customize at a minimum using a GitOps workflow. What about Argo C? Like, there's a bunch of other technologies that you're also going to have to figure out. Like the other day, someone said, hey, why can't we just throw a Windows box into production? And I'm like, well, I mean, it's a legit question, right? Because can't we just launch a Windows box as a virtual machine and just throw it out there and go to town? Right? How many of you, by the way, have ever heard that? Or how many of you have even asked that, right? Where you're like, hey, why is this taking so long to get into production? It's MongoDB. How come you can't just launch it? The 24 verbs, by the way, are typically the reason why it takes operations and DevOps a while to launch these technologies because we don't want to be figuring these things out in production, right? So here we are with the Kubernetes deep dive. So this is provisioning, so you can see the associated technologies here. And then look here, we've also got with operations, first of all, Backstage shows up again because let's scope it and policy and all the other stuff, right? By the way, look here under maintenance. Notice I list EKS, AKS, and GKE as clusters because we're picking on Kubernetes, right? And by the way, maintenance on a managed platform is so much easier. I mean, it just is, right? I know. I am the first guy who's like, can we run our own Kubernetes cluster? And I'm also the first guy who's like, oh, is that good for the business? Because man, maintenance on that is just so much easier than running your own cluster and doing it yourself, right? So my point being is that again, these are all the associated technologies, right? So automatically, by the way, with EKS as an example, or let's pick on something else like uh Docosaurus. I'm not going to pick on Docosaurus. Let's say Kubebench, for example, right? For auditing, right? We got to figure out how to run it. How does it get deployed? How do we provision it? Does it need configuration? Again, footprint smaller, but by using this framework for Kubernetes, I figured out now the other skills that I need to develop, right? And so it's a methodical way of figuring out how to implement technologies. And I just want to say this is that you don't need to solve all these problems on day one, but most of the time you at least want to answer it. Like, for example, tracing, most people won't figure out tracing on day one of launch. Should you figure out tracing? I don't know if you're running applications, probably, right? So the idea here is that if we're deep diving into Kubernetes, these are the other technologies that you might need to dive into. So just being mindful of time. So this is going to help you find out where your team needs skills. Now, let me stop for a second because there's been a number of questions, and I know we're not far from the Q&A section, but I just want to answer a few things. So how do we start using AI and DevOps? So let's see. I would say that probably the first thing to do is just grab an account on ChatGPT and start asking it to, make Terraform. Or I will tell you that I currently, waver between Poe, Perplexity, Claude, right? ChatGPT, OpenAI, basically. Because like, for example, Claude, just came out with 3.7 and it's a great model and da, 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 da. Anyway, I would say like pick your favorite place to go. And if you have any doubts, I would start with Poe. Go to Poe.com. It's done by Quora, right? It'll cost you $20 USD a month. And you'll get access to every single model as it's published. That's just my general recommendation. And then start asking it questions to get a feel for what it can and it can't do. Now, I just want to tell you this. You're going to run into the 80% problem. The AI will get you 80% there in most cases, sometimes 50%. And you're going to have to take it across the finish line yourself. So if it's code, just know that there's going to, don't expect too much. Just, get started and find out how to ask the right questions, how to use it. And then check out something like Cursor. Like we've got, Cursor courses, on and Copilot courses on our platform. You want to check out something like that where you can now in your IDE, right, incorporate AI and have it help you. I would say that, Copilot and Cursor are probably my two favorites. Coding, which I can't remember the name of the company, is probably another one. But, all of them are trying to inject AI into the system. If they don't use the latest models, that's probably how you would, best get started. Let's see. Managed Kubernetes. Hopefully I answered the question about managed Kubernetes. Someone basically said, can't this take the load off the team so they can focus on what goes into the pods? Yes. I am a big fan of managed Kubernetes. I'm also a big fan of when you're learning, running your own Kubernetes clusters. So just FYI. But if you're in production, I kind of do recommend that you use managed Kubernetes, especially if it's your first time with Kubernetes. But anyway, I digress. Okay. And I see a question there about Backstage and a couple other things about Kubernetes clusters. So I'll come back to that. So I'm going to save that for the Q&A because I just want to make sure we cover this material. Okay. So you've had me talk about strategy, provisioning, operations, and support, as well as the verbs and the skills that you build underneath of those different sections. We have an assessment, actually. We have an assessment that you can take, and someone's going to post the link in for me, right? We have an assessment that you can take that will allow you to rate both your individual and possibly your team's skill sets. And let me show you what that looks like. So here, when you go and you get started, it's going to ask you to put your details in here. And please make sure if you come back to this that you add unique details because I think it does actually kind of keep track of have we seen you before, right? And basically you come in and you answer questions. There's 20 something questions here, right? Just questions for your verbs. And it's going to ask you questions like, hey, rate your abilities team to justify your service offering. And remember what I said. One is a manual, undocumented, not consistently followed process. 4 is pretty much an infrastructure as code, semi-automated, pretty strong process, and 5 is like fully self-healing. So what will happen is as you answer these questions, right, it's going to keep asking you, how do you cost your service, right? How do you design it? And eventually, as you answer these questions, you're going to get to the end, which is going to look like this. And this is going to let you know that, for example, this team is probably not that great at operating a technology or service. Maintenance, licensing, documenting, auditing, governing, they're a little weak, right? I mean, a little weak, maybe a lot weak if it's just all in one, right? Now, when it comes to strategy, they're looking great. They're all 5s over here. And they're a little below average when it comes to provisioning technologies, when it comes to configuring and securing and whatnot. And they're a little below, maybe right at average actually. So let's be nice here. Logging, monitoring, covering, they're right at average. But what we're really looking for is we want this 4, right? So we have an assessment that you can take that will actually help you figure out where you are. Now, as an individual, you can use this to assess the skills. Do you know how to trace on Kubernetes? Do you know how Kubernetes logging works, right? This skills rating can be very helpful for you as an individual, as a team, or as a company trying to figure this out. So this assessment is available to you, and you can do the assessment yourself because there's a couple of options here. One, you can take this assessment, right? And you get the results. Oh, that's a pretty version, isn't it? We'll get to that. Notice, by the way, justifying, costing, designing, all the stuff is here. And that's what that radar will give you, is it'll give you a radar assessment of, okay, hey, this is where I'm at. So what would you do with this? Like, what is a suggested plan for how you might follow this? Well, let's take a look. So we do have a suggested kind of upskilling roadmap, which starts with, hey, why don't we first just do the assessment? Let's figure out where we're strong. Let's figure out where we're challenged. And are there any adjacent technologies? Because like if we're doing Kubernetes, right, there could be more technologies that we have to do. So let's identify that list and let's prepare. And then for the next 4 weeks, let's figure out how to get the strategy verbs and the provisioning verbs. And notice there's an order. Let's start with storage and networking first. Let's figure that out. And then let's get to provisioning and configuration. And then we can do the remaining areas that are inside of the provisioning pillar. And then for the next 4 weeks, why don't we focus on maintenance and performance? Why maintenance and performance? Because you're not going to be secure, by the way, if you can't maintain your product. And if it crashes, there's going to be an issue. That doesn't mean that governance and compliance and auditing are not important. It doesn't mean that documentation and licensing are important. Those are typically a little easier to solve for an engineer than the maintenance and performance pieces, because that's got to be tested, done, and you got to break the toys a little bit. And notice the highlight here. Maintenance is a part of configuration and security. So if you can get the configuration right, then you'll get security, and maintenance usually will go well as well. And then last but not least is the support piece. And then I would do this before you launch. Figure out how you're going to do observability, how to recover, and then all your support workflows. What's escalation going to look like? What's on call? How do people get connected? Do you have SLAs and SLOs attached to those? Yeah, do that. So the key takeaway here is we just went through 25 verbs that represent skills that you will need both for technology and for the associated ecosystem of a technology. We focus on Kubernetes. We've got a simple kind of 6-month roadmap for how you can upskill across all of that. Doesn't necessarily take that long if you feel like you can give more time, but it's there just in case you need it. And don't forget, there's levels of competency within each of those 25 verbs, right? One that's just an ad hoc, undocumented, inconsistently followed process, all the way to automated self-healing, which you're going to see more of as automation gets a little easier with AI, as it gets a little smarter and more capable and less costly. Yeah, that's a whole discussion in and of itself. Okay, so then what would be your next steps here? What would you do next? Well, one, use the tool. Hopefully the URL for the assessment tool has already been posted in a chat, so you've seen it. And so you're going to see the assessment tool pop up, and you're going to be able to walk through the assessment tool yourself. You're going to pick one gap that you're challenged in, maybe talk to your leadership and secure some, something for a formal upskilling program. Start solving those skills gaps. That's what it's for. That's one thing you can do. That's do it yourself. You can also talk to us if you want to. I mean, I'd be completely remiss. I work for KodeKloud. I love working for KodeKloud, right? And I'd be completely remiss if I didn't mention that, like, you could talk to our team. We invented this framework, right? And we're pretty good at it. And we are solely focused on DevOps. So if you want to talk to people who know the landscape and teach about it and consult about it, you want to talk to us, right? And you can also start a team trial. And, we understand this particular set of challenges really well. We work with a bunch of companies to talk about this, customize, and help basically upskill their teams. Now, we've got courses that cover a bunch of this. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention things like, you know, DevOps soft skills, right? Which, people forget about, or even hard things like we've got courses that cover multiple pieces of service initiation and service provisioning, like the CK certification course, Terraform, DevSecOps, which by the way, these are all really great courses. Ansible, autoscaling, CKS if you're doing security, right? Although that's attached to licensing. That's my fault. I did that. And then things like chaos engineering, great course, right? Prometheus. There's the handsome Sanjeev, who's one of my favorite coworkers. And then, we've got Rago doing the EFS stack. So like this is just a smattering of like the large number of courses. And by the way, we also have an AI tutor because, everybody has AI, but like our AI tutor is actually pretty cool. So if you do some of our labs, by the way, you'll actually have an expert right there who will help you. And so just know that we have a pretty broad portfolio. Okay. So that's the whole thing. So we're going to switch because now we're going to answer some questions. So I'm going to start running through the things that I saw here, but please feel free to add more questions to the mix. And, I just want to say before I get into questions, like these verbs and skills are extremely useful and can be a framework for methodically thinking about all the things that you need to checklist from a skills perspective before you launch a technology into production. So hope you found that useful. All right, let's talk about the questions or comments, actually. So let's see, Dinesh, let's see, Backstage IO is getting traction for IDPs. Totally agree. However, its adoption does come with challenges and considerations. Dinesh, if you were here, I would high five you because Backstage is a beast. Sanjeev, by the way, is Sanjeev is actually publishing a Backstage course that is probably about to be published here within the next like week or two. It may be a little bit longer. And I have to say that like having dealt with Backstage in production before, oh my gosh, what a beast it is. It is such a beast. So I couldn't agree more with that. Let's see. This, by the way, this framework is not just for teams. This works for individuals. Someone was asking like, is this just for teams? So I just want to mention that no, not at all, actually. This is actually what a single engineer might want to know to launch a technology. So it's good for individuals, it's good for teams, and it's good for multiple teams because you might have multiple teams doing support, strategy, operations, and provisioning. So this framework is not just limited to teams. You can definitely use it for individuals, right? Absolutely. Okay, so other questions. The Kubernetes cluster setup in 2 hours can take 4 hours to fix networking issues. Yes. Yes. Terraform script written in 1 hour can take 2 hours to recover from state corruption. Absolutely. So don't tell me, by the way, that Terraform doesn't have storage attached to it, right? CI/CD pipeline configured in 3 hours can take 5 hours to debug. Absolutely. Docker image, those are good, actually. Yeah, some really good things. So to be clear, that's why support includes like things like troubleshooting, for example. Because the best way to build these skills is not only to get the expertise. And when I mean expertise, I mean like what the documentation says. But you also need the experience. So my general recommendation is don't work on a platform that doesn't offer the ability to have some kind of hands-on labs or an environment to play in. Now, I say that because this is the whole reason that Mumshad started KodeKloud, is that he wanted to have a platform where people could go to not only learn technologies, but to also play with the technologies. So be aware that I would say at this point, like 95, maybe 99% of our courses have interactive labs for every single facet of the course. Now, I will tell you that there's certain certifications that are predominantly hands-on and very low level that don't really have labs because they're fundamental. And, we just wanted to not overwhelm people. But just be aware that the vast majority of our courses all have hands-on interactive labs in the browser. So if you've never seen it, it's actually pretty cool. And the team has done a good job of implementing that. So, does KodeKloud plan to have AI courses soon? Well, actually, we have AI courses now. So just be aware that we've kind of fuzzed the line a little bit because of ML ops. We do have courses, for example, on LangChain, PyTorch, pieces like that. We have AWS certified AI practitioner. We have open AI courses. We have prompt engineering courses. And the main reason that we're doing that is that we are very cognizant of AI enhanced DevOps. We are very focused on making sure that our DevOps tribe, our DevOps people, are not left behind because everybody's eating DevOps and our people are not somehow prepared for how for AI, how AI is going to impact their DevOps skills. So I still want you to build raw, like native skills in all of this stuff, but I also want you to figure out how to inject AI into your problem solving and into your critical thinking. You still need to be a good problem solver. For example, how are you going to know the AI is wrong? You still need that, right? But our company does offer AI classes because we are very cautious about having AI enhanced workflows. We want to make sure that our DevOps people are prepared for the impact AI is going to have on DevOps. So, yeah, we have AI courses. When is KodeKloud launching a mobile app? What can I say about that? Maybe not as soon as I want it, but possibly soon. But that's a very loose definition. Just stay tuned. There's a mobile app coming. Just stay tuned for that. Let's see. Can someone send a link to the assessment? We got some resources at the end. Yep, there is. Let's see. Other questions. I find that as a newbie, I find that DevOps unravels. Yes. Yes. I'm not sure who posted that, but I just want to say this. So just like our Kubernetes example, where you're like, I'm just going to learn Kubernetes. And then you're like, but wait, I got to learn Helm as well? Yeah, you probably should learn Helm. Wait, what's customized, for example? I don't know. Are you editing YAML files? Yes. Wait, I gotta learn what Prometheus is? Yep. Yeah, you probably should learn Prometheus if you're messing with Kubernetes. You don't have to. You might have another monitoring tool. I mean, you're right. It does kind of like octopus out. I will tell you that there is a limit. There is a limit to the number of technologies that you need, but like, yeah, it does kind of spider out really quickly. So, so you just take it one step at a time and just, stay maybe within an area. Maybe you really love provisioning. Maybe you really love operations. Maybe you really love support, whichever it is, right? Let's see, Backstage IO. People implementing DevOps guys will suffer. I'm not sure there's a question there. Let's see. Our company has blocked the websites like ChatGPT, Gemini AI, Claude, and others due to privacy policies. How do I get solutions from AI sites? Yeah. So you may have to do that outside of work. And I will say this, a lot of government entities or government-related entities are not allowing AI. And you want to be very careful what you post, like proprietary code and stuff. That's like third party. You want to keep that private. But I will say this, Olama. Olama, Ollama. If you have a system that has a decent card, you might be able to run something locally. Now, I will tell you, is it going to match the performance of the third parties? I'm just going to tell you, no, it's not. Unless you've got multiple video cards inside your system, it's not, right? But it will teach you how to run the AI. It'll teach you what's involved in a kind of a Docker style manner. Olama is an awesome tool for that, or LM Studio, or we could go on and on, but I'd probably start with Olama since it's really easy to use. But otherwise, you are going to work on it outside of a website. Let's see, are there any advantages in installing Kubernetes rather than using a managed solution? So, Farhan, I would say that the advantage always between running on-premise and cloud is security and control. And if you're really good at it, cost control. But I do want to say that I know people are knocking it, but usually the value of cloud from operational offloading and all the stuff, people are like, oh, it's expensive. Let's talk about the value of it, right? Is that if it saves you a bunch of operational headaches and lets you focus on the things that are core differentiators for your business, then the value is there, right? I meet a lot of companies who are like, we spend $10 million a year in, cloud expenses. And I say, okay, so what would you do if you ran that on premise? And then they kind of go through the mechanism. They were like, well, before we went to cloud, we were spending $20 million. Now, I will say that in that particular case, the company was really good about managing their cloud costs. I've met a lot of companies who moved to cloud and they treat it like their old data center, and they're spending twice as much because it's just expensive data center 2.0. And that's because they took bad processes in their on-premise environment and brought it into cloud. So, like, what are you going to do at that point in time? No offense to those companies, but I understand that you're spending more than you intended, but are you seeing any benefits at all, even if you're spending twice the dollars? I like to kind of reframe cost conversations into value conversations because I don't believe that cloud is always the answer, like any technology. But there's a reason, by the way, that AWS alone, for example, is at $90 billion. It's not just hype, right? So there are advantages in installing your own Kubernetes cluster. How about moving from DevOps to MLOps? Just so we're clear, MLOps is just DevOps done with machine learning. So don't get me wrong, there's a whole different kind of life cycle around data and hosting models, but it's like running databases. MLOps is just running a specialized app. That's all it is. So just learn how that works. Is there a learning path that includes all these courses? I don't even know what that refers to. Let's see, many big orgs like banks have central platforms and central DevOps teams. They do the main target feature teams. DevOps only reuse it. What do we do in this scenario? Well, focus on your particular section. So if you're part of a team that only does support and somebody does everything else, then awesome. The only thing that you then need to do is you just need to focus on the support skills. Or maybe you only do provisioning and someone else does support. Excellent. Focus on the provisioning skills. You only need to do all of those skills if you're responsible for all of those sections. If all you do is operate and support, then just focus on those two pillars. Forget about the provisioning and initiation. Forget about strategy. Totally good, right? Let's see. I plan to have all the cloud native certifications by mid-year, and we're just about to release Certified Backstage. Yep. So just know that we are pushing our golden Kubestronaut, right? The whole CNCF thing. So we are actually pushing to have all of the CNCF certifications listed, not just Kubestronaut, which we already have, but the entire golden Kubestronaut package. Cilium, GitOps, Backstage, Istio, all of that, right? Or is on our roadmap for this year. So here, by the way, are the links for starting a team trial, consulting our team, our skill gap template, skill gap quiz, and then slides and recording, which are going to get shared later to your email. So just wanted to make sure I put this up because we are approaching time. So I'm going to continue to answer questions, but I wanted to make sure that you had this available to you in case you needed to run because it's like top of the hour and you got a meeting, right? Okay. Let's see. Any Red Hat Satellite and OpenShift courses coming in? So we do have OpenShift courses. I will say that OpenShift still remains popular among enterprises. So unfortunately, Red Hat doesn't. Yeah, there's some difficulties there. Yeah, playing with Red Hat a little bit now. IBM. So I would say that it's on our roadmap. I can't say exactly when, but there is some evaluation of what our next OpenShift course should look like. After CKA, which is a good certificate for DevOps? Well, DevSecOps is a thing. DevSecOps is a thing. Now, don't get me wrong. We've been injecting security into DevOps for a long time. So I would say probably right? The security specialty, that would probably be the one I would go after. You could go after CCAD too if you're a developer, but probably the security specialty, right? The CKS is probably the thing I would go after next. How far will CKA get you without DevOps experience? So I would say CKA is going to cover a lot of the verbs, but it's a little bit like learning how to play a lot of really great things on a guitar, but you've never played with a band. You probably need some measure of experience. CKA will probably get you into the door for an entry-level job, but you probably need to volunteer to work on a project. come do KodeKloud Engineer with us because we actually offer some real world environments for you to work on projects. And maybe volunteer for an open source project to kind of get some experience working in a DevOpsy style manner, right? Or work on a portfolio and pull some people in, like 2 or 3 people, and just work collaboratively and experience that. Is it possible to replace Datadog with open source tools? So I discovered a technology recently called SIGNOZ, SIGNOZ, SIGNOZ. And I was told that it's an open source replacement for Datadog. Now I have some doubts because Datadog is pretty comprehensive, but I might check that out actually. So let's see. Really appreciated the courses. Thank you for that comment. We love that. We're glad that you like the CKA and the CCAT courses. Any plans to add a Dynatrace course? So Dynatrace is something that we've kind of debated. We don't tend to do a lot of third-party courses, but it is something that's on our roadmap. So if you want to go to our feedback page and kind of thumbs up it, just so you know, the more people who we are responsive to people who go to our feedback page right off of our homepage. It's right at the very bottom. And we're very responsive to people who thumbs up, like Jenkins or GitLab, whatever the technology is. So if you want that, let us know. Give us a thumbs up, give us a comment on our feedback page, and let us know if you really want Dynatrace, because we are looking at third parties, but we don't typically chase them per se. How to reduce the cost of applying these pillars to existing business costs in terms of time and money? As engineers, we want to use the best practices, but for businesses, the priorities are different. Yes. So this is where you've got to get buy-in, right? Because part of this is that, we are living in a world that is resource constrained. Time and money typically are the 2 primary constraints. And that's true for us, true for businesses. So what we need to do, though, is that for the people who are making these choices and decisions, we've got to show them the value of the thing in question. So if you come to someone and say, hey, right now our team is really good at these 5 things and not so great at these 5 things, and here's my evidence as to why that is, and we've had outages and we've lost money because of that, and we've lost time because of that. If we want to get good at this, here's the roadmap that I would recommend. Framing it as a value conversation that will either get them time or money back, particularly if we're talking about speed, is typically the best way to frame that. So it's a complicated question, but that's my simple kind of off-the-cuff answer. I see many playgrounds on the website. Is this scenario-based or just playground? Just playground to do anything. That's all it is. Let's see. Let's see. If you're just starting out, do you recommend managed databases while learning? I would say that cloud is pretty much a staple. So managed anything can be very useful. I would say, though, when you're learning, try to do things as manual as possible so that you know what the managed service is managing on your behalf. Try to do it the hard way so that when you do it the easy way, you know what the value is, but also how to troubleshoot. Okay, so I just want to recognize that it is 12:02, and so I will continue to answer questions, but just be aware that, we are kind of at the end of our time together. So if you need to leave or drop off, please feel free to do so. I'm going to answer a few more questions and then we're going to close out. Let's see. Why only official? I can't. Let's see what else. How about EBF? Oh, eBPF. Okay. So eBPF, right, is going to show up in our Cilium course here very soon as part of the golden Kubstronaut. So you're going to see that. So stay tuned. We got some eBPF coming for you. Is there any need to learn ML or AI concepts if you're working on a DevOps role? That depends on your role. I would say learning AI concepts and ML concepts, yes. ML ops, and if you're not working with a machine learning team, maybe not. But it could still be helpful because AI and machine learning are going to be injected in pretty much everything you do. So in the next 5 years, just to say this, and this is not a big, fortune-telling thing, right, is we're going to have AI and ML ops in practically everything we do, right? That's going to be the predominant applications we're going to run are either going to be integrated with AI and machine learning, if they're not already, or they are going to be pure AI and machine learning. So, yeah. I saw a question answered about how's KodeKloud's helping people move from DevOps to MLOps. We do have a fundamental of MLOps course with the fabulous Raghu. So yeah, let's see. Restrictions on the playground, by the way, are on the page, so you can see them there. All right. I am targeting to learn for cloud platform architects, so any scenario-based learning or assignments. So one, we do have some architecture classes on our space, but a lot of our courses contain design decisions as part of the courses. So like, for example, DevSecOps will teach you a lot about how to design a CI/CD pipeline using security. So just be aware. We try to cover a little bit of all of that. Let's see, do we plan to have a CI/CD course on end-to-end for model deployments? So we have a SageMaker course that's pending that covers a lot of that. And of course, our introduction to MLOps also talks about kind of model deployment from end to end. So we've got some pieces of that, and there's more to come, right? Let's see. So why less GCP, not even covered via Terraform? So Dinesh, I would say that we love Google. Matter of fact, I could say it for the entire engineering team and myself included, we actually love Google just because of the engineering, the customer experience. It's amazing. And most of Google's courses are free online. So, right? So we love Google, right? But Google kind of makes it hard for us to, in a sense, profit from stuff. Now, that being said, we are actually chasing Google. We're still doing Google. It just wasn't our first thing that we went after. Plus, Google is sometimes funky with how they do cloud. Like, I know they're third place typically, but they are like some markedly low in the third place. Google has a great customer experience, and sometimes their approach is just kind of wonky. So I would say this is that our roadmap does include Google. We love Google. We actually probably prefer Google over almost anybody else. Sorry, AWS and Azure, we love you too, but still Google. So you'll see some things come out here soon. What do I think about Victoria Metrics as a replacement to Prometheus? So I'm just going to say this. I don't know anything about Victoria Metrics. I've never even heard of that, actually. So shocking. Usually, I pretty know the landscape pretty well. And I don't even think I've ever even heard of the word Victoria Metrics. So thank you, whoever wrote that, because I will be checking out Victoria Metrics, because I can name probably 6 other replacements for Prometheus, but Victoria Metrics wasn't even on my list. Is your DevOps course this detailed? As like this? No. So there will be some stuff coming out for the 24 verbs of production. Like I have a book pending on 24 verbs of production. There's an ebook that we have out on it. We've got videos, coming out on it. And so we probably will do a course actually, Jimmy. So if you want that, please go to our feedback page and thumbs up it, because we'll definitely do one. This is a kind of our first foray, or maybe our second foray in socializing the 25 verbs of production. So, all right. It is now 12:07, so we are 7 minutes past the hour. I really appreciate you all hanging out. I hope that you found the 25 verbs of production very useful for analyzing skills and what you would need to do for both single technology and multiple technologies. As you can see here, here's all of our links. Please catch me on LinkedIn. Catch me at Michael at KodeKloud. Talk to our team. And if there's anything that we can help you with or courses that you want to see, send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. Absolutely love to. So I'm going to hang out here for just a second in case there's other questions, but otherwise we are officially done. So thank you. Oh, let's see. Someone asked about LangChain. We have, of course, a course on LangChain. I will tell you, by the way, LangChain is getting a lot of flack for being relatively unstable, but we do have a course on it because it is a fabulous tool. So LangChain is there already. So I would also check out Pedantic, which we're evaluating as well. But we do have a course on LangChain, and the course itself is amazing. But there have been some complaints about instability in the community for LangChain. So, I think for most of it, it's not a problem. But productionalizing LangChain, I think, has caused some headaches. So, thanks everyone. Let's see. Last question. What would be the best entry-level certification for a beginner to pursue in order to get started in DevOps? I would go after a Linux certification. After that, maybe go after Kubernetes, maybe cloud, but Linux is probably the first one. Yeah. Okay. We're going to shut it down. Thank you so much. Catch me, Michael, at KodeKloud. Catch me at LinkedIn, and we will see you at our next webinar.